Are things just not getting hot anymore? Was there a spark at one point and then all of a sudden everything got cold? When you go to your kitchen, do you find out that it just isn't the same, that it doesn't have the same kind of warmth? Well, in today's video, we're going to address a lot of these problems and hopefully get them fixed. Oh, we're talking about your electric stove, not your love life. So let's get started. The first thing that we want to do here, knowing that the stove is on, is test the burners. We don't have to test all of them, but we should test at least one or two burners to see if they turn on or not. The reason that we want to do this is we want to verify that the stove itself is getting sufficient power. These burners, ironically, regardless of which ones they are, take almost as much wattage as your inside oven does. And because of that, if the burners won't turn on, you may not actually have an oven issue, you may have an electrical issue involving your stove. You can sometimes even get the clock to turn on, but not the burners. The burners require 240 volts for an American electric stove, as well as the oven. So if these burners work, any combination of any burners work, then it definitely is a problem that's isolated to your oven. And if not, we're going to go over some things that could cause an electrical issue as well. So if these work, that localizes the problem either to the control board or the oven element or something in that together. So now that we got that tested, let's go on to the next thing. Now, if you have an oven that is in the wall and you don't have a stove top, there are some things you can do from the front that will save you a bunch of time. The first thing that we want to do is inspect the whole element and see if there are any breaks or physical damage to the element. If it looks like something has exploded, then chances are it's just the element. One thing that we can do to save us some time is go ahead and remove the two screws that are in the front of the oven and take the element out and pull it out slightly to see if we can do a multimeter test for continuity to test the internals of the element and see if everything is okay. And with the element screws out, we should be able to pull forward. And I don't know how well it can be seen from the camera. There are two small electrical connections in the back that we want to test. From here, we are going to slowly pull the element out, which I didn't do a good job of. By accessing the front, the connectors on the element could pop off like the left one did. To help you, you may want to use a clip or a wooden clothespin to secure the connector. I did use a metal clip, which I really didn't want to do, but the stove is unplugged and away from any electrical outlet. This clip will prevent the connector from retreating into the insulation, which is important to not have happen if you are testing a stove from the front. Now we are taking a multimeter to test the heating element. If you don't have one, I do have a link in the description for the one I'm using, which is about $30. I've been real happy with it for 3 years now. Switch the multimeter to ohms resistance, then you will place the leads on the bake element, the one disconnected spade and the one plugged in still. Keep the leads on the element for a few seconds until it stays steady on a reading. A typical stove element will be between 20 and 40 ohms resistance if it's good. If you keep getting an open line or OL signal, then there's a break somewhere in the element, and that is definitely what is bad on your stove. Once the element has been tested, reinstall the element and secure it with two screws. If the element was what was actually bad, you can use the clip technique to hold both terminals in place while you install a new element as needed, so the stove doesn't need pulled out from the wall. From here, we want to turn the stove around, making sure that the power is off so we can access the backside of the stove. And here now, we're going to take off the two screws that are on the stove itself on the back plate to access the terminal block, which gives the stove power. Units can be different. This one has two screws, but many other types could have four or even just one, depending on the manufacturer. And there we go. Now the big thing with this to note is that there are three prongs that go on this with a 3-prong cord. The fourth one would be down here at the ground if it had needed such a thing. But you want to make sure all three of these terminals are in good shape. Lots of times lately we have seen one or two of these, usually the black or the red, totally destroyed. And if it's totally destroyed, you're going to need a new terminal block. They run about $30. The wiring may need snipped and trimmed. There is excess wire here to use, but it's a little costly problem, but not too bad, and you definitely want to fix this. But you will likely need a power cord as well as the terminal block if this whole set goes bad. And I've seen it happen about 4 times in the past month at our shop with trade-in units. Now the other thing to note here is this is the 2 wires that we had dealt with on the front of the stove for the element, L1 and L2. So if you need back access, if it's too hard to get in the cabinet, you can do it from back here. Typically we do move everything from back here instead of the front, but if you are in a tight situation, you may only be able to use the front. You could use your multimeter to verify there as well, but make sure that element or the terminal block is in good shape. And if it is, we can go forward. One thing to investigate is using the multimeter to check voltage if the oven is plugged in and verify the amount of electricity you're getting on the unit. With your multimeter, you want to take your leads and test center to L1, and you should get about 120 volts. And then center to L2, you should get another 110 volts or 120 volts. And then L1 to L2, and you should get about 240 volts. If you don't get 240 volts, then there's something definitely wrong with the power supply, either your outlet breaker or the power cord itself, and you'll want to investigate those. It's more of an electrical problem than a stove problem.
Let's access a few more components by unscrewing the back panel of the stove. Yours may look different and have more or less screws, but you'll need to take all of them off to access other components for testing on your stove. This particular stove has 10 screws that held this panel on. Here's what the back of the stove looks like from top to bottom, but there are variations to what the back of this stove looks like, so let's go over a few major components that are on the back of this stove. We've already gone over the bake elements and terminal block at the bottom, and near the top right of this is the temperature thermostat that we're going to inspect next. There's also blue wires to the broil element, and sometimes the control board, if it's bad, you can try to turn on the broil element, and if it doesn't work too, then it's definitely the board, assuming the stovetop itself worked. To the left there is a light bulb for the stove that we don't need to inspect, but there are some features also missing on the back of this stove, much like a good storyline to Game of Thrones Season 8. This cutout is typically where the thermal fuse goes, which kills heat to the oven if there's a self-cleaning mode on it, and you would test it exactly like a dryer with a multimeter, testing for continuity. Some other stoves will also have a center cutout for a convection fan, which could have a small heating element on it that, if it went bad, could result in the oven not heating up quickly enough for you. Finally, there are some ovens that have hidden heating elements in them where it's not seen in the oven, but there are usually leads at the bottom of the stove chassis itself. The stove thermostat tells the control system how hot or cold the stove is. It's possible that the thermostat is making the control believe the oven is extremely hot, therefore will not heat up. Generally, I find the opposite to happen, that it never is warm enough, causing it to heat up too much and burn food, but we can test which it is pretty easily to find out if this is the culprit of your stove. With the thermostat unplugged, you want to take your multimeter and set it for ohms resistance. On many thermostats, you're going to quickly find out that your multimeter leads will not fit in the extremely small connectors on the thermostat. One way I use to test then is to stick the multimeter leads on the back of the connector of the thermostat rather than the front. Doing this will make testing easy, and here's what the ohm chart looks like that you should expect for a given temperature. If the ohms number is way off of the current ambient temperature, then it's bad and needs replaced. In this case, my thermostat is fine, and a typical good number is between 1050 and 1100 ohms for most stoves on the market today. In this next step, we are dealing with live voltage, so be careful and wear insulated gloves just in case. The last component we are looking at is the control board, which has relays and control modules to cycle electricity to the bake element to turn it on and off. If nothing else seems to be bad, it's possible it could be the board. You can test this a few ways. One simple way is to merely inspect the board for signs of physical damage. Oftentimes you may see a burn mark, which could indicate a module has failed. You may need to take the board off the stove and look on all sides of the board. If you do see damage, then the board definitely needs replaced. One other way to do this is to run a bake cycle on the stove with it plugged in. Then you use your multimeter to check the spade connectors on the back of the element and see if they are getting voltage. I'm showing you how to do this without power connected, not because I'm worried about handling 240 volt electricity, but my camera and power cord were really not conducive to me filming it sadly. When doing this, you should get between 208 and 240 volts by touching the multimeter leads between both connectors when the bake element is on. If you've gotten this far though, chances are you won't get the voltage, and if you don't, then the control board is likely bad. But of course, look for any loose wires or damaged connectors in this entire process, but do that when the power definitely is off.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video on your oven not heating, but I hope now that your stove is almost as hot as my wife. But if it isn't that way, just make sure to put something in the comments with a description of what's going on, and hopefully we can narrow down issues. I would say 90% of the time when we have to fix a stove, it's one of those 4 or 5 main problems. But I hope everything in this video gave you some clarity. Make sure to have a screwdriver and a multimeter to do most of these tests. And if you feel uncomfortable doing something, don't do it, hire a professional. But there's a lot you can do on this unit by yourself. And at some point I'll put out more videos on more other types of electric stoves like Frigidairs and GEs, because I tend to have more problems with them than Whirlpools. Have a great day.